Hello, welcome. We're glad you could join us today for the True Insights to hear Jeff Smith share how he's been able to transform a traditionally paper-based organization in a traditionally manual industry to digitize operations. My name is Michelle Chung, and I'm the director of True, a public-private partnership with a mission to create tech-enabled jobs in Hawaii. We all face similar business problems. How do I take the first step in digital transformation? How do I engage customers during the pandemic? And how can I leverage technology to become more efficient and productive or competitive? True serves to support organizations in Hawaii by sharing how innovative companies have solved their business problems so that others can accelerate their adoption of technology and innovation. Today, we welcome Jeff Smith, who's reaped the benefits of digitally transforming a global organization, to share how he did it and what the organization got out of it. If you're in the process of considering or have been working on modernization, then we want to support you, whether it's with follow-up discussions, technical details, or demos. So please do reach out to us at True. True is an initiative of the Hawaii Executive Collaborative. If you're interested to learn how you or your organization can be part of True, or to see other use cases and solutions that we've published in the past, please visit us at hec.org/true. I'd like to briefly introduce and thank the other organizations who help us bring you these events. The first is HTDC. It's a state agency attached to DBED. Their mandate is to grow the tech economy and workforce here in Hawaii. And the second is the Entrepreneurs Sandbox, where I'm presenting from. It's a co-working facility out in Kaka'ako, owned by HTDC and managed by Box Jelly. It's Hawaii's front door to innovation, where you can stand up technology, showcase it, and provide an open space for collaboration. I just wanted to share a short agenda with you. Paul will start off with an introduction, then Jeff will share the what's and how's of his DX journey, and then we'll open up to Q&A. Before we begin, just to let you know, we do have a Q&A session, so please submit your questions through the Q&A function. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll have access to a quick survey so you can provide your feedback. So please do that. Take a couple of minutes to do that later on. So to start off, I'd like to introduce and welcome Paul Yonamine. He's the Executive Chairman of Central Pacific Bank and the founder and chair of True, one of the Change Frameworks initiatives under the Hawaii Executive Collaborative. He's run organizations for decades, ranging from consulting to investment banking to financial services, both in the US and Japan, and has a keen determination to help Hawaii thrive through his leadership, both at True and other efforts. Welcome, Paul.
Great, thanks, Michelle. You know, everyone, I see a great opportunity for Hawaii to better leverage technology. The pandemic has heightened the sense of urgency, and through efforts like the True Initiative at the Kaka'ako Sandbox and others, we are all speaking the same language and headed in the right direction to modernize and digitalize to make us all more competitive. You know, as organizations adopt technology, it gives us the opportunity to drive more productivity, but more importantly, to tech enable our workforce in the state of Hawaii. And that addresses our ALICE workforce, the asset limited income constrained employee. That's why I thought Jeff Smith would be a great person to speak to us. I worked with Jeff at IBM, where he was the CIO. He was the one that led the agile transformation across the company and was responsible for the company's IT strategy. I mean, can you imagine how difficult that was to change IBM, a century-old organization? He's currently the Chief Operating Officer of World Fuel Services, and it's a $40 billion global company. Not only does he drive innovation at a very fast pace, but he improves operational effectiveness through digitalization, something that we can all learn and use. And Jeff was able to do it in an industry that is traditionally paper-based. You know, what's more, he's really practical in his approach. So he's not just spending to get his goal. He funds the effort in a really pragmatic way. Here in Hawaii, I'm sure that you would all agree that adopting technology is somewhat slow going and challenging. I wanted him to share how he did it so we can build our toolbox leading similar efforts here. So with that, enough from me. Over to you, Jeff. And really, Jeff, thanks for giving us some time today.
Oh, thanks, Paul. That was a very generous introduction. And what I hope to do is just show you my journey, kind of learning, which is really the key that I think we constantly understate and underestimate what we can get done with limited resources. Just a couple minutes on me. I grew up in Ohio. I went to school at Miami University in Ohio. I spent a good part, probably half my working life on the West Coast of US, and then the East Coast, 13 years on the East Coast of Australia, and then the last 6 years on the East Coast of the US, first in New York with Paul at IBM, and then now down in South Florida. So what I want to do is just share with you some of the learnings I've had in some aha moments, and that there's some recipes in here that you can use. I'm also in a very similar environment in Florida to what you may see in Hawaii. We're not a tech, not tech enabled, but it's not a tech center in the U.S. and Florida. This historically has not been. It's been short on skills, things like that, and it's been used as an excuse not to be able to make, transformational change. And I can give you some ideas about, how to go about that. So, I've worked in big companies and small companies, different experiences, but I think what I'll do before I tell you about the last couple of years at World Fuel is where I started and where the learning came from. So back in 2005, I was in Australia, and I had come from running a large IT organization of 5,000 or 6,000 people at a telco called Telstra. And I wanted to go to a small company to say, hey, what can I learn here? Maybe there's something here. And I went to a company that in 2005 was building some cloud assets. It was at the kind of the forefront in cloud technology. I had a team, a total company was 40 people, maybe 20 people were in engineering development roles. And what I learned is that they had new methods that were incredibly more productive, where they learned, great problem solving skills, how to take a big problem, break it into lots of small problems, and multi-process the problem through small teams. So we had this concept of loosely coupled teams, but tightly aligned. So very small staff, but they had really engulfed themselves in agile practices, where clarity was more important than certainty. Course correction was more important than perfection. The talent density was really critical. If you're going to run and get transformational results, you need a high ratio of the people doing the work versus the people leading the work. You need a lean leadership structure and high density of the teams, so that the leader's role is really, to set clarity of purpose, help facilitate that prioritization and getting the work at the right pace to the right teams, and inspiring people to do wonderful things. It's as simple as that. So I had run that for a couple of years, and I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be neat to experiment? I wonder if it's possible to get the innovation of the best small companies, but the scale of a larger company. So I went to be originally the CIO of a large bank and insurance company in Australia called Suncorp. It's the largest insurer, fifth largest bank there. And I ultimately became the CEO of the shared service company. But I noticed that we had set, our aspirations low. And I thought, what if we can take this agile culture and embed it in a big company and find out if we can do some things dramatically differently. And we did. And our metaphor for that was a sports team. We thought, what are great sports teams that learn and adjust? What do they do well? Well, they have a good playbook. They know what plays based and tactics they use based on the talent that they have. They have coaches to make adjustments. They replenish their talent on a continual basis. You don't keep static all the time. You've got to look at that, and then you keep score. You've got to measure things. That's how you figure out where you are. It's not to punish people. It's to actually give you insights on where you can make change. So while I was there, the financial crisis was going on in 2000 and 2008. And I had this dream, and I thought, well, let's go ahead and operationalize culture. We had this concept that if we can make culture something tangible, that you can learn it, you can practice it, you can measure it, then you can get better at it. And so we broke our practices. We broke our culture into practices. Some were leadership practices. How we did our release planning, how we did our prioritization, how we formed our teams. Some were collaboration practices, which were, how did we do estimation together? How do we do design together? And some were delivery, which was technology. So the interesting thing was in our culture, in an area where we're building lots of technology, 2/3 of the practices didn't have anything to do with the tech. It had to do with the leadership and the collaboration and how to form productive teams so that you can do stuff with a lot fewer people at a far greater pace. So we did that for a bit, and we came up with a real insight here that I think I've carried with me, since that time, which was work with people you aspire to be like. If you want to make dramatic change, the problems that you encounter are generally not new. Someone else has already solved it. So pick up and work with the people that have done that before. So who we went to Amazon. This is 2010. And we decided we're not going to have an arm's length transaction. We're going to have an intimate one where both sides can benefit outside the commercial arrangement. And ultimately, we became AWS's first commercial customer in financial services. And so you think about a lot of people starting the cloud journey today. We started this in 2010, and really with skills no more than most people would have at that time either. You're in a small area in terms of, think about constraint of capacity. Australia, second to last bus stop on the tour, with New Zealand being the last. There's just not a lot of people there. So you had to figure out ways to learn from others. And we thought we would go to our partners. So we established a strong relationship with AWS. We picked NetApp as a technology partner in storage and content management. It mainly not because of their product, but they were the highest rated company to work for in the world. And I thought there's something to be learned from companies that really treat their employees well, know how to do things efficiently, and create a great culture. So we worked with them as well. And we picked a few others. We were Atlassian's, for those of you that use Jira, products like that. We were their first commercial customer, and I liked the guys that ran the company. And I thought, boy, we can learn something from these people. So the learning was, hey, we don't have to solve everything ourselves. We can go and leverage what others have done, and we can get better at a faster pace. So at that point, I went to IBM to be the chief information officer. I had about 25,000 employees. Now, at first blush, I thought, well, gosh, now I've got the capacity. I should be able to solve, anything. But the reality were the same constraints were there. And what I realized is the biggest constraints aren't time and money. The biggest constraint is the constraint of thought. It's what can be done and how do you leverage that and how do you do that? So I really had to get the culture turned around to say, hey, we have got to learn that bragging about complexity and that we can solve the world's greatest complex problems is not the most important thing. My point was we should just solve the problems that customers want solved. And we've got to find a way to take a great big problem, break it into lots of small problems, form small teams around that, and then distribute the work at the right pace so that we can multi-process the problem. So one of the things I took on, because I knew we needed some demonstrated evidence, was just in the area of employee productivity tools and things like that. And at that time, in 2014, when I went, Macs weren't really allowed in IBM. And this really came down from the finance organization that said, hey, we got 400,000 people. These are $400 more a device. Unless you can tell us how you can manage these total cost at less than a PC, we're not going to do it. Now, all the people inside my organization said, well, that can't be done. They're expensive. It's going to take more, support. We haven't done it before. And I thought, well, I better rely on the people that know these devices better than anyone, which happened to be Apple. So I went to the CIO of Apple and I said, listen, Niall, we could be your biggest customer, but you're going to have to share with us how you provision these things. Because Apple had figured out a long time before that they didn't have to go through a normal process that we did at IBM and most companies did, which is you create a build, you have to install a build on a laptop, you have to send it out to someone to do it, you've got to distribute it to employees, you've got big call centers, you've got lots of software to make a PC work. And Niall told me, because Jeff, the secret is it only takes like 5 pieces of software to hook a Mac to a network because we already do disk encryption. We already have antivirus. You don't have to buy that stuff. And then we don't do builds. We do it on the fly over a network. It's no different than buying a laptop in a Mac store. You go in and get it, open it up, put your credentials in, we'll provision it. So I said, well, why don't you share that with us? Because Jeff, that's secret sauce. Can't do that. And I said, listen, we might be buying 200,000 of these, a year if you could show us how to do that. And he says, Jeff, why don't you get your team in here Monday? We'll get working on this. So it was interesting that, it was both sides are going to benefit out of this. But what we learned was in 3 months, how to do that, how to provision a Mac, how to put the least amount of software, how to make it secure. And ultimately we showed the total cost of that was less, about $300 less than a PC. And our call centers were far smaller. We had a call center managing 100,000 MacBooks of about 11 people versus close to 1,000 for the other 300,000 PCs. So, you know, we've proved that you just don't need additional funding. You can solve the problem a different way by working with people that solve, you know, problems, you know, that have already solved the problems you're looking at. I also introduced some other tools. I went to other companies I wanted Aspire to be like. We became Zoom's first commercial customer, Slack's first commercial customer. We brought Box and some other tooling in, but we wanted to really learn from these companies, how they run great companies, how they do things differently. And so what I found out again is, you know, again, you don't have to solve everything yourself, and we can drop our operational costs at the same time we introduce new technology. So the learning out of IBM was it wasn't about the scale of people, it was about the scale of thought. So then the last 3 years I've been at World Fuel Services. We're headquartered in Miami. And when I went there, the first thing I did was take a look at our engagement scores, which were awful. You know, it was really kind of, you know, a bully culture. You know, we had old technology. It was all Oracle 11i. If anyone knows Oracle, that's probably 10, 15 years old. Old big software packages on old networks, all on-prem, no digitization at all. We had no use of APIs, of customer portals, of robotics for ingestion of data, nothing. And so to give you a perspective, we were in a spot, and we're also in Florida, where everyone's excuse was there's not a lot of tech talent here. Most of it's up in the Northeast, the West Coast, Austin, not here. And I said, well, that's just not a good excuse. We've got to find a way to solve this problem. So the initial state was old technology, old thinking, manual processes. You know, we're in the energy management, fuel logistics, and renewables business. So you're talking about bill of ladings, you're talking about delivery tickets, you're talking about invoices, all manually entered, thousands of people, you know, millions of transactions done manually, you know, throughout the world. And we're close to 200 locations. And no concept of how to get over it, because what happens is everyone likes to bring up all the complexity of why you can't do it. It's almost easier to talk about why something can't be done as opposed to why it can be done. So your clarity of thought is really important in how you put a strategy together. So again, no cloud, no robotics, no automation. That was the starting point. So what I did is I got all 55 of the executives together that worked for me. I'm the COO, so I had financial operations, shared service, IT, and we got together for a week. And I said, we're going to put a strategy together that's really clear, it's aspirational, and we're going to go after it. And what we did first is we looked at the org, and I said, we're going to organize ourselves like Spotify, like a software company. So instead of most people that do org design, you start top down. You think, well, what execs do I need? And then what execs do they need? And then, you know, by the end of your conversation, you're actually talking about the most important thing, which is the people doing the work. So I said, we're going to start bottom up. We're going to look at what work we have, organize small teams. We had some rules. They couldn't be more than 6 people, things like that. And we grouped these people into squads. We grouped the squads into a tribe, which is the Spotify model. And we grouped multiple tribes into a domain. We spent a week doing this. And at the end of it, we figured out we don't need 55 executives to run all these. We need 25. So we had double the overhead. A good signal for you to determine, you know, whether you have the right leadership model and talent model is the overall talent density. When you have, you know, too many leaders, you know, managing too few people, you're going to run into that. Tells you your talent density is not high enough. Your number one key is to grow the talent, the people doing the work, so that they can operate in a lot more self-managed function. You just need less leaders to manage it. The reason most companies, big companies, have lots of leaders is they don't tackle the most important thing, which is the talent of the people doing the work. So we did that. We came up with a strategy that kind of had 4 pillars. It was talent and leadership is number one. And it was for me at IBM. It was for me in Australia. You know, it's the key enabling thing. The only unique thing any company has is its culture. Anything else can be copied. Your strategies can be copied. Your products can be copied. But if you can create a great culture of how you attract the right leaders, the right talent, organize in an efficient way, make it attractive for people to have fun and solve problems, then that's magic. You know, few companies really do that well. So we said, you know, our talent Leadership is going to be number one. So in that talent piece, it was going to be something I had done at IBM, but something I did at Suncorp. I started a huge grad program. I said, we have to bank on our universities, build strong relationships with them locally, and pull raw talent out, because skills you can train, but aspirations and core intellect about an interest in your craft, that has to come naturally. And students do that. They've been spending 4 years going through college. So their listening antennas are generally stronger than older people like me that want to learn. They've been used to it. So coming in, we've got to take advantage of the culture that the university's built into these young people and use that to help transform. You know, there's a symbiotic relationship with the people as well. We also needed to thin out the leadership ranks. We also needed to replenish with people that had done some of the things we wanted to do. So you keeping static with the same formula and then trying to do something aspirational, that doesn't work either. You've got to figure out the levers you have to pull. And for us, the talent and leadership was one. Culture was the second hill we had in our strategy, which was around operationalizing it, you know, making it something you could practice. We came up with our playbook. We had our agile practices. We had a curriculum around that. We had maturity assessments. It's interesting. It's really important that you do something regularly to give the signals back so that you know where you are. So we had a maturity assessment at a squad level. We had maturity assessment for leaders. Most people don't do this, and this is one I'd highly recommend. And every quarter, we not only moderate the performance, we evaluate the performance of every employee, leader and practitioner. And we put a maturity assessment for that. And that way you give the signals back. I always tell people, something you do once a year, you never do well. You do something regularly, you get better at it. So every quarter we do that. And as an instance for what we include in our leadership assessment, we measure our leaders on net promoter scores. Any of you that are used to that, you know, you can't game the number. And in general, anything over a 70 is pretty good. Anything, you know, below that and you get in the 30s, and you can actually get negative scores. And for those that don't know what a net promoter score is, it's looking for what's the advocacy, you know, for that person or idea. And generally, if you have on a scale of 1 to 10, if you rate somebody a 9 or a 10, you get a credit for 1. If you rate someone below a 3, you get a -1. You don't get a lot of credit in the middle. So it is actually, when you go through it, it's possible to get negative scores. So, you know, we use the net promoter score. I also came up with my own metric. I call it a BMI. It's not a body mass index. It's a bureaucracy mass index. And it's how many leaders, what's the ratio of leaders to total practitioners? A good metric to have is around 12%, 10 to 12%. That's good. 10% leaders to people doing the work. And when I mean leaders, I mean all aspects of leaders, project managers, executives, leaders. We kind of group, we're very good about saying, you know, if you're a practitioner, you're really contributing to designing and building something or doing operational work. So we have those metrics that we do every quarter. In addition, on leaders, we would look at, you know, where's their effectiveness in forming teams, distributing work at the right pace, measuring the things that matter. Where's the evidence of them attracting new people into their teams? You know, you want someone that's a magnet and not a repellent. And then where's the evidence of listening and learning from others? The single most important characteristic, in my opinion, is that listening and learning. That if the bigger your canvas, if you're learning, you know, from someone in another group, that's great. If you're learning from someone in another company, that's better. You're learning globally, that's even best. You know, 7 billion people in the world. Chances are someone's just solved, you know, a problem that you think is insurmountable. So that culture, you know, was our second hill, the first being talent and leadership. The third was digitizing our business. And I said, we're taking all this stuff, you know, manually. We're going to go, and I don't care what method you use, you guys figure it out. You can use APIs to ingest your data. You could build portals. You could use robotics. Doesn't matter what the method is, but the goal's really clear. Any data that enters our company, whether it's a transaction or a piece of content like a document, it's going to be captured digitally. It's going to be processed digitally. We are not going to manually enter this. So I think other things to talk about here is your goals have to be clear. It has to be just as understandable to an executive as it is a graduate that just comes in the door. The more if your goals are complex or they're not meaningful or measurable, people won't get it. You know, they won't get behind it. So that was really clear for people to understand. And then our fourth fourth hill was cloud. And I didn't want this to be unambiguous at all. And I said, we have hundreds of applications, they're generally old. I want either things rebuilt and refactored or migrated onto cloud. We have 24 data centers. We're closing all of those in 2 years. Now, of course, at first blush, everyone said, well, that can't happen. We don't have the talent. You don't understand. You can't move Oracle to the cloud. I mean, I got 100 things. And listen, if we spend half the energy talking about what we can do, we'll figure it out. So let's put all our energy, let's assume we can do this. When we come up to a problem, when we're migrating or an issue, let's deal with it then. Let's don't deal with it up front. And we don't need to spend half of our time up front determining what can and can't be done. Assume, back yourself, and get the partners that can help you do that at a fast, accelerated rate. So those were our goals. Get everything moved to the cloud, cloud native, and that included our network. So our networks globally, we have to deal with 40 or 50 different telcos. It's a new technology called SD-WAN, software-defined network, where you can take your traffic and you can take it off the telcos, put it on the public internet and encrypt it and use the capacity of the internet at a far lower cost. So those are some of the things. When we said cloud, we meant everything. We meant our network, we meant our data, we meant our applications. We mean no data centers. They have to be shut down. So again, unambiguous goals are really good. Even if people don't agree with it, there's no dispelling what the goal is and aspiration is that you need to get over. So again, we said we're going to do this, in the next 2 years. The other constraints I put up, it's self-funding. You're not getting any money. So we had a certain OpEx level and CapEx level for our company. And then everyone said, well, you can't do that because the evidence has shown that there's a big hockey stick investment. You have to, because you're funding the cloud at the same time you've got your data centers, you've got new tooling that you're going to want to put out there for people. And in our case, I said, I also want to be able to self-fund, better collaboration environments. So we picked, went back to the ones that worked for me. I went to Zoom. I sit on Zoom's advisory board. We went to Box for content, Slack for messaging. We also use Teams, Microsoft Teams for the non-technical group. And so I said, well, you're going to have to fund all of this too, as well as access around the world, VPN access from any desk, remotely. Now, we did this before COVID. And the real reason we started doing that was I was actually fearful of hurricanes in Florida. And I thought we just can't worry about, if we lose the data center and people there, it actually impacts everyone else. So we need to be able to have anyone to have access from any device at any time. But I think this concept of self-funding and it gets, constraint-based leadership, leads to good innovation, because you start thinking about what can you do to save money while you're implementing this at the same time. And for instance, we moved our PBX systems, our telco systems, to Zoom PBX as well as AWS Connect, and that saved us millions of dollars a year. Most people, if you're in the infrastructure business, you know that probably 20-25% of your infrastructure costs is related to your networks and network spend. So find ways, to make it, more malleable and actually the experience a lot better. And it helped us in COVID, because when COVID hit and most of our competitors didn't have phone systems that could route remotely, we had that with AWS and Zoom, and we got additional business in the worst time last year, particularly in the UK and Europe, where most phone systems were all local phone systems. So again, you use the opportunity, to do that. So again, we had this principle of work with those we aspire to be like, not like ourselves. You typically you emulate the people that are around you. Our three partners at World Fuel historically were always Oracle, AT&T, and IBM. Three good companies, but those three are not at the forefront of changing your game. So we kind of look like them. I said, so our key partners are going to be AWS, going to be Box, going to be Zoom, Ariaka for our software-defined networks. And we went with them and we said, we want people on the advisory boards, because we also had a principle that, both sides should benefit outside of this commercially. So we wanted to help on the product roadmaps. And interestingly enough, when COVID hit, we found out that a few of our locations didn't have Zoom phone PBX available. We went right to Zoom and said, we need to get this in to Costa Rica and into Brazil. And we had that, fast forwarded so we could support that. We went to, to Box for workflow for content, and they added that in their product features. And then for VPN access, we went to our SD-WAN provider. And for Singapore and other areas in Asia where VPN access was hard, and they said, listen, we'll put that in our network. So all they need is an ISP connection and they can get VPN access. So again, we're leveraging our partners, and we even extended it to say, you need to help us in training. We started training programs, and my view was, if someone's skills were behind date, that's the person's accountability. That's not the company. Now, the fact that we wanted to move to cloud means we need to train people, but I said, we'll train, we'll fund that, but it's going to be on your time. So our training classes were generally done by AWS from 6 to 10 at night. I said, it's after work. We're not going to consume work hours to do that, because you have to be interested enough in your craft to spend your time to learn, and then you practice that, in the office as you're getting your work done. But I think the real key is this is not rocket science things to do. If you're going to be successful in anything in life, whether it is your spouse or partner, or whether it's people you work with, you have to have a great relationship with them. And the rising tide, generally lifts all ships. So the other thing we did with AWS is they actually, we're brand-wise, we're not a well-known brand, we're a big company, but universities didn't know us. So AWS would go and sponsor autonomous vehicle machine learning exercises at the universities with us. So we're leveraging AWS's brand for ourselves to attract young people to come and work. Because my pitch was, Florida is a great state to work. It's low tax, it's great weather. Come here. So I actually went and did a sitting in New York in Manhattan 2 years ago, and got a lot of practitioners to come and, and pitch. And I did it at Slack's headquarters, and I had Slack, interestingly, helping us recruit people from New York into Florida. So, you have a lot of equal opportunities in Hawaii. It's a desirable place, fantastic weather. There's a lot of things you can do to drive the attraction of people, to work there. And even with remote working, getting access to people around the world to help you to learn faster so that you can do some things that maybe you didn't think, could be done. So the net of it is, out of the last 2 years, we didn't quite hit all of the migrations on the cloud. We've only closed 22 of 24 data centers, but still, had I set the goal initially at 3 data centers, I'd have probably closed 1. The fact that I said all 24, I got 22, and the last 2 we will close this year with our final migration of old Oracle applications. We're ingesting all of our data digitally in terms of transaction, contracts, content data. Our network has completely been migrated to software-defined network. And again, we didn't go and evaluate and try to figure this out. We didn't have experience in software-defined networks. We went to Zoom, and I sat on the advisory board with the CEO, and I asked him, what do you guys use? You seem to have a good at managing your data and moving it around the world with great performance. He says, Jeff, this is where you go. Go to Ariaka up the street. I'll make an introduction. So again, short-circuited, the discovery process of how to solve a problem. Our BMI, bureaucracy mass index, is at 12%, from initial 28%. So again, I helped self-fund by having less leaders to fund more doers. At the end of the day, you need people that are practitioners that know how to do the work. We used to have technology constraints. That's why you went to work at a big company that had more technology than smaller companies. It's not the case anymore. Everyone has equal access, and not necessarily equal opportunity. So we also fund not only the universities and pulling people out of that, we go to, and I don't know if it exists in Hawaii, but Year Up programs, which are for disadvantaged students as well that, didn't get a college degree, but are going back trying to get associate's degree at community colleges. We fund them as interns and then offer them jobs elsewhere. So it helps the community. It also is a low-cost option for driving your talent, up as well. We do a quarterly assessment of all our teams and all our leaders. And at this point, our cost is been completely flat. While we have funded Zoom, Slack, Box, Atlassian, Networks, Cloud, which is quite extraordinary. Everyone's, well, how do you do that? Well, you live within your means. You sit there and say, if I'm going to spend money over here, I've got to find it over here. And it came out of leadership expense. It came out of consulting expense. It came out of, shutting down software licenses that we didn't need. It came out of the network spend, even just conference calling. We saved $1 million on conference calling by moving that off of a carrier onto Zoom conference calling for no cost. So again, you pick the right companies, you will figure this out. And that's what I probably, for me, have learned the most, is that, I'm constantly in search of that next great company that has figured out and solved a problem that I just have not been able to overcome yet. And when you find that, it's magic and it spreads. I always said, sneakernet is faster than Ethernet. When you find something great and you get to use it and you build friendships and relationships, it sticks with you. Your roles may come and go, but your friendships and experiences you carry with you the rest of your life. So they might as well be good. So that's been our experience, pretty simple. Agile culture, small self-directed teams, loosely coupled, tightly aligned, strong leadership, but lean, and strong talent density, where we've probably replenished about 1/3 of our workforce the last 2 years, lateral hires and graduates from around the world. We have hubs in Budapest, we have hubs in Costa Rica, we have hubs in Miami and in different locations, Houston. So you can do this. I mean, that's my other message too. We're not a high tech company, to attract on brand. We have to attract on the environment, and generally great people want to be around other great people with big hairy problems to solve. That's what you have to make the job enrichment attractive. So the core conclusions, I'll conclude a couple thoughts here and then open it up for questions, is that, one of the biggest constraints are never time and money. That's what everyone's going to tell you, but it's not. The biggest constraint is constraint of thought. And if you can, set really high aspirations, stretch your thinking, someone out there will like that and they'll want to help you. And you've got to reach out and recognize it's okay to say, I haven't solved it. I'd be willing, to back you, and if it's like a wave in Hawaii, just get on the crest of the big waves and ride them on in, so you don't have to generate the energy yourselves, follow others that have already solved it. And then another learning is we just constantly underestimate our ability to learn new things in life. And when you think about, technology evolving the way it has, and people still running mainframes, still running old software, it doesn't make sense. But, we get caught up, looking in the rear view mirror. And my view is, the windshield's a lot bigger than the rear view mirror. Don't make your future judgments based, on your past decisions. You got to be open enough, to make those changes. And then, big breakthroughs really happen when what's suddenly possible meets what's desperately needed. And if you take a look today with COVID, all of a sudden companies are caught off guard with, shoot, we're not digitized. It's hard to even get access. There's a lot of companies. I talked to a number of banks here in the US that, their facilities closed, but they still required printing off lending documents for lenders to do their work. So they'd have to, people were sneaking into the building to print the lending documents out, to take them out and courier them over to the lenders. So, you're caught off guard for problems that could have been solved years ago. And then you're trying to figure out, what is the definition of a digital transformation? And my view is it's where, every piece of data from ingestion in the front end of your company all the way through the back end is done digitally, and that is done natively in the cloud. That's a digital transformation. So for us, it's invoices, it's bill of ladings, it's delivery tickets, it's contracts, anything that we have to ingest, we're ingesting it digitally, we're processing it digitally, and we do that different ways, sometimes with systems, sometimes with robots, because we don't have time to re-architect a solution, with APIs that we can connect externally with partners, XML, things like that. There's different vehicles for doing it, but if you set your mind that we're not going to accept doing it manually, you will figure it out. You'll and leverage your partners to do that. Then my final recommendation is aim for success, not perfection, because you'll just lose the opportunity to learn new things in life. And then take this chance, to really do something, terrific. I mean, we are in a vehicle, or we're in an environment right now where, You're never going to have all the resources you want, no matter how much you think it takes. You can take that and minus a certain percentage. No one's going to give you all the money to do that. And you can't project forward how much time it takes you based on how much time it took you to get there, because that could have been decades. And so I know in a lot of people's minds, it's like, well, I can't possibly do this quick. You can absolutely do this. The tooling is there. The thinking is there. You've got to line up the right people. There's no compression algorithm for experience. You do need to get people that have done it. Well, when I wanted to move to cloud quickly, I went and hired 13 people that I'd worked with before in Australia, moved them to the US. Guess why? Because they'd done it before and I didn't have to relearn that. And then I could add graduates into it. And then, there's a good recipe for making dramatic change. And that means you need to have enough congestion of talent, both from the people doing the work and the people leading the work. But back yourselves, people will follow. If your message is clear, it's aspirational, you can do anything. So with that, I'll end and I'll open it up for any questions or comments.
Great.
Thank you, Jeff, so much. For everyone else that's on the line, please go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A function. But to start us off, Paul?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jeff. Great talk. And, I still remember when I was heading up IBM in Japan, and we got this directive to start buying our desktops and, our laptops from Apple. And, for many of you who are on this call, I'm sure you can appreciate how countercultural that was, because, IBM created the PC. And then in a little over a year, IBM Japan became the largest Apple user in the country of Japan, which was pretty amazing. And I think it was so popular, employees loved it, but that process of converting it, there was a lot of hesitation, there was a lot of fear in the process, and again, because it was so countercultural, to IBM. And then, Jeff, you talked about, you were the first financial service firm that went to AWS, and you came up with this decision that you should learn from others. But one of the challenges that we face here in Hawaii many times is that this is kind of uncharted territory. We don't to go and say, okay, we're going to use AWS, we're going to use Slack, we're going to use all these proven technologies, in the mainland, but not here in Hawaii necessarily. There's risk involved in that. There's fear of failure, and I'd like you to talk about that a little bit, with all these companies you've been to, what has been the mindset of the people in trying to learn from others, trying new things, going from PC to Apple, what are your observations around that? And how'd you manage that and successfully?
What Paul, you're right about, there is a lot of fear of failure. And it's not just Hawaii, by the way. This is, there's a lot of states. The stuff that I found in my own company and in Houston and in Austin and, Midwest or East Coast. But that fear of failure, I think, is actually masking the fear of feedback, which is really the fear of criticism. So I think people get hung up, they've got our war wounds. I've been a CIO for a long time. I've got war wounds of stuff that didn't work, and then what happens is that's what blinds you to what can be done, because you think back about, well, I tried this before in client server and it didn't work. It's obviously going to take twice as long here. So I think getting people that have done it before. So for me, I hired people in, at leader levels that had been through this migration, and all of a sudden, with experience comes credibility as well. And I think when we did that, and then we set really specific aspirations that were unambiguous. It wasn't we're going to run a digital transformation project. It was, we're going to ingest every document digitally. We're going to move every application to the cloud. And then once you do a bit of that, and you work with the right partners, people feel better about it, and your better employees will step up. That's the other thing I found, is that some of the biggest naysayers became some of the best people, to lead the effort and do the effort. But you also find the people that aren't, and you have to deal with that. I think that's the other thing. Sometimes you and I saw that, with IBM, Paul. If someone wasn't working out, we just moved them to another area of the company. We necessarily deal with the problem, but what you find out is those people can be cancers that hold everyone else back, and you've got to be really careful that you get enough balance in the chemistry of your organization so that people are looking how to solve problems. But it's not easy, because there's lots of people that will tell you why it won't work and want to hold back. But at the end of the day, there's enough great examples. And I think more than anything, it's just getting your people around others that have solved those problems. It's harder to for people to argue with that.
And I guess you have to, as a change agent, I mean, this is clearly not a popularity contest, because I remember when you joined IBM and you were making a lot of these changes. I mean, you're not going to be the most popular person. You have to have that, mindset and that fortitude to drive ahead. But what went through your mind, as you went to these different companies, even World Fuel Services, on trying to digitize the process? I mean, what went through your mind during that initial process?
I think the first thing is it's kind of like shock that could it still be this bad, or could it still be this old? And that's happened like everywhere I've went, that the acceptance of continuing to do things the way they had been done. I mean, I found people that had been doing not only the same work, they'd been in the same office or same cubicle for like 10 years. Now things have advanced. And so I think it's this constraint of thought is the biggest issue. And I think at IBM, it was, I had multiple battles, because I had the product people saying, well, you can't use Box. We have a competing product that none of our customers will buy if you don't buy it. I'm like, well, none of our customers are buying it now because it's a horrible product. We're going to use something that services the employees. So, in the sales at IBM, Box was like the big winner, because, file sync and share was really important to deal with the customers. So I think it's knowing what problem you need to solve and why it's important. I mean, purpose matters, and people generally get aligned around purpose easier than they do what the work is. And it's like Simon Sinek has that book, Start with Why, and he's right. If you start with purpose, why we're doing this, hey, we're going to make this experience great for employees. It's kind of hard for people to fight that. They can fight what it is and how you're going about it. But if you get them aligned on purpose, you can at least start in the right position.
Yeah, thanks. I always thought that IBM would acquire Box, to be honest. But
yeah, me too.
Yeah, but World Fuel Services is completely global. You have people, all around the world. And, and as you drive a lot of these initiatives, Mike Moore has this question, are the self-directed teams distributed geographically? And I would imagine, as you, you're trying to manage, a global operation, you have different cultures, different mindset. I mean, Japan to the US is totally different, but, how are the self-directed teams distributed, and how are you managing that?
Yeah, in some cases, we've tried to have people in hubs, or at least in the same time zones. So sometimes they are they're co-located in the same city. Sometimes it's both, like Costa Rica is a couple-hour time difference from the US. So we have a squad that could be made up of people from Costa Rica, Houston, and Miami. But they're distributed, ideally, you want people in the same location. Of course, we've also proven, working remotely, our productivity hasn't been hit. Probably we've had more issues just on mental health and stuff from people being, home 100% of the time than we have on productivity. But I would say the other thing too, we call them self-directed teams. They're self-directed in getting their work done, not on what the priorities are. That is driven from your product owners as well. And one thing that we've done, I think, pretty well is we've gone to our partners that have these practices that are really good. We adopted HR practices from Zoom, because Zoom has like a 98% employee engagement. They're really well run from an employee point of view. We took our engineering practices from Box, and we've actually trained product owners in our business that had no product, no agile background, never. I mean, been there for 20 years. We used the Box product teams to train our people. And that helped too. We didn't have to take that on ourselves. So I think it actually, when someone meets someone else that's in a recognized good company that's out to help them, that helps too. Same with Amazon and some of the others. So I think having the teams, we've got them all over the place, and they have to work together, especially if it's 24/7. But for the most part, we try to keep the squads geographically aligned in terms of time zone, because it just helps. When you get over a 3 or 4 hour difference, it hurts.
Yeah. So, you might be happy to learn. I mean, I learned from you on Box, and even at Central Pacific Bank, we were just putting in Box, in terms of managing loan documents with customers. Actually,
yeah, great,
very easy, secure solution. So that's something I learned, we spoke about it a little bit, but this true initiative is literally about learning from others.
Yeah.
True initiative is not about trying to stir up a bunch of new innovation per se. We're trying to create an environment where people can learn from others, manage the risk, have good references and use cases so that we can further digitalize. So, COVID kind of, stopped the process of us convening. We're doing our best, virtually. But, as we progress in 2021, and hopefully the vaccine really kind of, starts containing things and we get more traction there, that's the end game, is that we want an environment where people can come and learn from others on proven technologies. I want to change the subject a little bit on a question to you on the BMI, the Bureaucracy Mass Index. You talked about that. You talked about the migration to cloud. You talked about shutting down data centers. It sounds like you reduced headcount significantly. It sounds like it, but that could be very difficult here in the, based on the island culture. We're a small community here, and we try to, keep employment at a certain level, and I mean, naturally we have to, take action at times, but I'm curious to learn, whether, you were just looking at straight off, reduction in force, or you were reassigning, upskilling, placing people in different positions. I mean, what were some of the takeaways on that?
Yeah, I think the thing is, I mean, for any company that's going to go to a digital transformation, it takes money to do that. Now, I don't think I think our labor in FTE is roughly the same from when I started, but we have changed what they were doing. So we've trained like our back office personnel that used to just enter transactions to be our robotics team. So now they're automation experts. So I think the shift in skill sets and the type of people we have shifted. The FTE didn't really, because the reality is when we're doing so much manual work, it's going to take a lot of technology work to do that. So we kept our OpEx on our FTE flat. But the mix of some of the employees did change. I mean, if we have a lot of people that were manually entering transactions and we automated it, some of those, weren't interested in like robotics or kind of digitization stuff, but we would, you may be, eliminating some of those, but at the same time, you're hiring engineers and business analysts. It's been a big hire of ours because there's a lot of this low code, no code, where we don't need as many IT people, but we need more business analysts, critical thinking. That's been the shortage. So I think for one, because we're still hiring and keeping the employment up, we haven't hit that issue because I think everyone kind of realized we were funding the wrong roles. I mean, we were funding the roles of the past and not the roles of the future.
Okay.
And we have a question from the audience. Charlene asks, if as you're building a team, do you use your gut in selecting your team members, or do you use education, work history? And then do you believe people can change their character? Is it better to move them to an area where there's a better fit, or release them?
Well, we take into account a lot. I mean, the formation of a team in chemistry is really important. So the diversity in that team matters. And I'm not just talking diversity of race or gender, but diversity of background, what states they went to, what universities they went to, what families did they grow up in. You need diversity piece, and we take that real seriously. And so we have a moderation processes. We say, we're going to form these 3 squads. Where are we going to get the people from? And you want to put people in their power zone. I guess that's the other part of your question was, do you put them where their strengths are? Absolutely. I mean, I think one mistake I made historically was, you look at someone's weakness and you say, well, that person's got to develop that weakness. Let's go give them that job. Well, the reality is, if someone's weak in something, they're probably not interested in it, and making them marginally mediocre as opposed to outstanding in what they're great at was a mistake. So we try to say, we've been really successful with people that were just in the wrong roles. I had a development manager that was a horrible leader of people, but he was a phenomenal business analyst, and we had him lead the re-engineering of our financial processes. So people generally have something they're really interested in, but people that aren't interested in their craft at all, they're going to struggle in this, because you have to put your own effort into this as well. So, but any great coach, I'm a big soccer fan, so English Premier League, and a long time ago, I had Sir Alex Ferguson, who coached Manchester United, for anyone that's a soccer fan, for like 30 years. I had him come out, and his big point to me was, you don't spend near enough time on forming your teams and the chemistry, because I spend 80% of my time doing that. It's all about the talent of the team, the chemistry of the team, and then your tactic has to match that talent. And you guys put teams together as though everyone's automatically going to work well together. You put a project together, you say, I need a project manager, 2 engineers, 2 BAs, now you're a team. He goes, that's BS. It takes a while to get productive. So teams need to stay together, and you should replenish within a team. You shouldn't disband. So that's one principle we have too. We don't disband squads unless something's just over. We try to keep it together and feed the work to that squad, and then replenish, make sure there's a replenishment plan within the squad. We're trying to follow what the sports teams do.
Oh, that's really cool. And then you mentioned that there are 4 hills. I love that it's so focused. How do you socialize that with a whole I mean, you have a giant organization. How do you socialize something like that?
I had something I actually used at IBM as well. I had someone that did these drawings. She was really good at, when we started putting this together, knew nothing about us, but she, in the background, when we're doing our strategy, she's drawing the journey of our strategy. People deal with visual content better than they do voice. And so we started with that, and we would socialize these pictures to say, this is what we think, this is where we are in the hills. And if you looked at our strategy pictures, it shows these hills and the problems we would have to overcome to get to the next piece. So we do that. But I also think we also include people from all levels. That it's, we did our strategy, the org strategy, we included, just the executives, because that was how we're going to structure our teams. But when it came to how are we going to do our cloud work and technical work and stuff, we had people contribute from, from all levels. And I think that's important too, that, the best ideas have to win. It's not they're not hierarchical. They come from, whoever has great ideas. And probably something I've learned during COVID that I should have been doing before is, we do a lot more communication now. And I sat there and thought, why is it that I'm just doing some of these things now? Like, I have a daily checkout now every day, 4 o'clock. I didn't used to do that. I have a weekly Zoom webinar with all leaders in the company. And that's not just execs, all leaders in my group, once a week. And then I have a global town hall every 2 weeks. And I always have a guest speaker. So I had Eric Wan from Zoom come in. I had Aaron Levy, who runs Box, come in. I had, I've had guest speakers come in, and that way, keep everyone. But I sat there and thought, well, I didn't have to wait for the pandemic for this. I should have been doing this like years ago. So there's some learnings on communication as well. But I think, your communication has to be clear so that everyone, you have to think of it in terms of your audiences, that execs look for something a little differently than an entry-level business analyst or someone that's doing transaction processing, but it's equally important that they all understand the strategy. So you have to be able to abstract your messages differently based on the people, the audience, and what they're looking for.
Oh, thank you so much.
And Michelle, I think we're just about out of time, but it's really clear to me that to drive digitalization and this transformation of doing the right thing, it takes leadership, it takes people like you, have that fortitude and, to do the right thing. And many times, without leaders like that, middle management has a really tough time, because they don't have a safety net.
Yep.
They don't have investment dollars. And I think we got a very good glimpse of that today. I think a lot of the participants may have sensed that when you have a chief operating officer, a chief executive officer who gets that, transformation proceeds, but left to middle management with the bureaucracy mass index, it's just not going to happen. So, that was one of the key takeaways for me today. And this was a very informative talk. I really appreciate you taking some time out, to share with us today. I hope you could stay connected with us in some capacity,
I would love to.
And when you come out to Hawaii, Michelle and I will walk you through the sandbox where we have the True Initiative and maybe interact with some of the companies here. So
That'd be terrific. I used to travel to Hawaii a lot when I was on the West Coast. It's near and dear to our hearts. And for me, going back regularly when the pandemic's over to Australia, it's a good stop off as well. So
very good. But thanks again for spending the time with us. And Michelle, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chef. And with that, I'll just close out really quickly here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, you. Paul. So thank you, everybody, for joining. I just wanted to take a moment to thank our true sponsors for making this and other events possible. These are the committee members that lead our use cases with the intent of sharing them to rise a tide in Hawaii.